Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session of Leaders Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we will be focusing on a regional focus. We will be looking at the West Midlands, and in particular, the impact, obviously, of COVID-19, especially on the economy and how we look to recover in the economy and also in the manufacturing and engineering sector within the West Midlands. Now, of course, this is a regional focused webinar, but we hope that there will be lots of lessons learned from what's happening in the West Midlands that will be useful for lots of you, perhaps based elsewhere in the UK. So what we will do, like in all traditions of Leaders Live, we'll have around about 45 minutes of discussion and debate. We always like to bring you guys into the debate, so we will be having 3 polls where you'll have the opportunity to vote and share your opinion, and we can ask the panelists to feedback on what comes out of those polling. And then at around 45 minutes, we're going to have about 15 minutes of Q&A. So you can all use the chat box where you will be able to put in your questions, and I will do my very best to take those and share those with the panelists. So for today, I'm really, really pleased to say that we've got an amazing panel that are going to be talking on this topic. So again, in like all Leaders Live tradition, we're going to just ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves within 30 seconds, and then we're going to head straight into questions. So I'd like to just start. Margot, would you like to introduce yourself, and thanks for joining today?
Thank you, and a big thank you to Bosch for initiating the Leaders Live event and inviting me to participate today. My name is Margot James. I am Executive Chair of WMG, and prior to that, since 2017, I was a Business and Technology Minister in the government. Thank you.
Thanks, Margot. Arun, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Margot and Mike, for joining us, and thank you, Helen, for hosting us today. I think this is going to be a fairly exciting session today. Arun Srinivasan is my name. I've been in the UK now for over a couple of decades, responsible for Bosch Automotive business in the UK.
Thanks very much, Arun. It's great to have you. And lastly, Mike, if you could just introduce yourself as well, please.
Hi, I'm Mike Waters. I'm Director of Policy, Strategy and Innovation at Transport for West Midlands, which is the second largest transport authority in the UK, responsible for the West Midlands area, Birmingham, Coventry, Wolverhampton.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining as well today, Mike. So look, I'm keen to get into the debate and into the discussion today. So looking at the West Midlands, it's pretty unique. It is home to many large manufacturing organisations, big suppliers, but also lots of small businesses that are servicing and supporting that sector as well. We know that the automotive sector has been particularly hard hit during the COVID crisis. And obviously with the West Midlands housing such a big proportion of some of that sector, how has it been faring in your opinion? How has it been coping as a region, given that you have got some sectors that have been especially hit by this current crisis? And perhaps, Mike, I can start with you, given your background. What's the feeling on the ground? How has the organisation that you represent been sort of coping and managing, and what's the feedback you've been getting from business?
Well, it's been interesting, I think, because we've seen almost two sides of it. On one hand, we are a transport operator. We own and operate the metro. We run train and bus stations. So we've seen the very real challenge that some of the transport sector's been grappling with firsthand. Literally, from a commercial perspective, revenues have reduced and costs in so many cases have gone up. But also through the innovation program, where we're working directly with a lot of the automotive partners and advanced manufacturing and engineering partners, mobile network operators, around the future of mobility and connected mobility. It's also been clear that our resident sector it's really challenged. You know, that it's been pushed. The capacity and focus for moving forward has been completely diverted to emergency response over those next steps, which is completely understandable. You know, furlough program has obviously been an essential support, but also massively disruptive to those medium-term plans. And I think in some cases we've seen some of the restructure and efficiency activity that I suspect was planned has been accelerated. So it's just nudged companies to take some of those tough decisions that they were perhaps hoping to put off for a little while. But on the positive, I actually think it's been a real test of some of the extended supply chain. And I think actually that's probably aided and can only help with Brexit preparedness. So actually I think for a number of the companies across the region, it's almost given them an opportunity to really, really understand their supply chains in a way that perhaps they didn't before. And that can only help as we move into the next couple of years. Automotive being a generally challenged sector at the moment anyway, which is openly recognised.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. That's a great point on the supply chain. I'm going to come back to that in a little while, if I may. Margot, from your perspective, in terms of the engagements with businesses, particularly in the manufacturing sector, which is an area of your expertise, what's been the feedback from them, and what's sort of your perspective on this?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this manufacturing has taken a massive hit. It's the Chamber of Commerce found that roughly 10% of companies, only 10%, were still doing well. All other companies in the sector are suffering to a lesser or greater extent. And Mike was talking about transport and touched on the automotive industry. And at WMG, at the request of the Mayor, Andy Street, we facilitated a roundtable of automotive companies and trade unions about 10 days ago. And out of that, I feel that we have a unified industry ask of government for more support, whether that is a demand stimulus, for example, via a VAT cut, like the hospitality sector have enjoyed, or whether it should be by measures taken to protect employment and R&D. But something, because I mean we're in competition as a region, not just with other regions in the UK, but also with other countries. And you've only got to look over at Germany and France and see the support that their governments are providing manufacturing, but especially the automotive industry. And we've got to compete with companies in those markets. So much more needs to be done. And in terms of impact, I think we should remember that, you know, only as recently as 2018, the automotive sector in the West Midlands alone was generating over £7 billion worth of value added. So it's got the potential, of course, with electrification and net zero to do so much more than that, but it needs support in the interim.
Yeah, very good point, Margot. Arun, obviously from Bosch's perspective, and you guys are a huge supplier to the manufacturing sector. From your perspective, what have been the challenges? And I guess, you know, what is it that you've been grappling with, like, over this period of difficulty?
Thanks, Helen. The challenges, as Mike and Margot alluded to, have been quite immense and potentially quite scarring for the automotive industry. I mean, we have always invested for regions. So we've got a global supply chain across various customers and serving the United Kingdom as well. And this poses a particular challenge because the virus went around in waves, so shutdowns happened in waves. So whilst we were still operating in the western part of the world, we've had to shut down in the Far East and vice versa. So this has been quite debilitating, especially when you look at tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. A lot is spoken about the OEMs and their bounce back, but I suppose we have to work together with the OEMs, because without the supply chain, the OEM industry cannot return to normalcy. And what's Mike alluded to it earlier, what's particularly helped us is the digital aspect. I mean, we've actually gone from working at offices to working from home pretty much seamlessly. Huge numbers of software engineers are delivering programs even today through the worst of the crisis, working from home in different parts of the world. And that's been an immense achievement. And all of that acceleration would not have happened had it not been for the crisis. The question is, what do we do next? I think we've got an immense opportunity, and I don't think we should lose sight of the gains we have made through digitalization whilst trying to capitalize on some of the challenges and opportunities we see going ahead. For example, we've had reduced traffic. There's been much cleaner air. What can we learn from it? What can we do? How did we measure the air quality? Can we use much more intelligent ways of regulating traffic and avoiding congestion? And such technologies, I think, need to be brought together. But I was talking to Margot earlier, and I think something like this can only be done as a coalition. It's not as if one entity has the prowess to bring to bear all the solutions. And we are part of a global family, and I think we need to capitalize on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Arun. I think that's a very good point. And we're going to talk a little bit on how we kind of come together, perhaps both as a region and nationally, and perhaps even globally a little later on. I just want to put out, we've got some polling that I mentioned earlier. I just want to put out the first polling, which is around what the audience might feel is the biggest impact currently. So obviously, perhaps some of you are operating in businesses, or perhaps you work for organisations. If you are in the West Midlands, great, do give your opinion on this. Even if you don't, even in your own region, it would be good to understand what you think has been the most challenging and immediate impact that manufacturing is facing currently. I would say as well that all of these are anonymous, so you cannot be attributed to whichever one you choose. But it's just good to get, I think, audience perspective on this. We'll just give a few more seconds just for anyone else that wants to vote. And then we'll just have a quick look at the results. Okay, let's take a look. So here we can see, interesting. So both decline in sales and uncertainty being perhaps neck and neck there, I think, in terms of what are the biggest challenges immediately for this sector within manufacturing, but closely followed by cash flow, which obviously is another major challenge perhaps for some of these businesses. Interestingly enough, lack of coordinated support isn't one of them. So perhaps this suggests that the West Midlands has really got its act together and has been quite proactive in working around with businesses and governments and regional governments to come together on this. I'd just be interested to get the panelists' immediate reaction. Mike, does this surprise you at all?
No, I don't think that's a surprise. And I think certainly wouldn't argue with the sales and uncertainty points. I think the cash flow issue is universally felt, no matter what the size of the business, but probably exacerbated by the sheer proportion of the advanced manufacturing and engineering sector that is vested in SMEs. So this is a very complex web of some very innovative, really good companies, but many of them are quite small and often family-run businesses that are then feeding up into the higher tiers of the supply chain, working in very, very complex environments, trading in and out of Europe and wider. So the cash flow is going to be an issue in that kind of company.
Yeah. Arun, from Bosch's perspective, has this been something that you have also kind of faced, both as yourselves as an organisation, but also perhaps with the interaction of those larger manufacturing OEMs?
I think decline in sales, for example, has been potentially the driver, and consequently cash flow becomes a major issue. We've also had to, it's no surprise that the automotive industry worldwide is running on very thin margins, and cash flow is a very key part of the sustainability of the industry. And we've had to be obviously wise and take care of our own cash. And being a private company, all the more reason for us to do that. And it's a great opportunity to sort of go back to basic discipline in how you run the business, how you manage the business. But I suspect cash flow, especially down the supply chain, will be far more crucial as we begin to ramp up, because people need to buy products to manufacture and sell on. Mm-hmm. And if the markets don't appear, you would not have the cash flow to buy the products you want to produce and sell on. So I think it's a massive thing as we begin to restart. While shutting down, we of course had to shore up all the finances as we were shutting down and go after the funds that were due to us. But I suppose it's going to be more telling when we revive the industry.
Yeah. And Margot, from your perspective, does it surprise you that uncertainty is still very much there? Obviously, we've been dealing with COVID and government has done quite a lot, I suppose, in terms of giving certain stimulus and direction to industry, but clearly there's still a feeling that uncertainty is still quite a key issue. Does that surprise you at all?
No, not really. I think businesses almost had to get used to uncertainty, because before COVID, we had all the Brexit uncertainty. And then COVID has added to that another dimension of uncertainty. But I agree with Mike and Arun that the principal shock is the plummeting of sales and the lack of cash coming in. It's a real problem for running the existing business and meeting the costs of running that business. But it's even more catastrophic when you look at it in terms of contributing to the costs of research and development for the next generation of products and cars, for example, in the automotive sector. Because, the costs of electrification can't be met by the sale of existing products. But when you suddenly get a problem whereby, 90% of your sales has just collapsed through the floor, then that is, uncertainty writ large.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of moves us quite nicely into, after having a look at kind of where we're at and what the immediate challenges are, what do we actually now do about them? And I guess this is a webinar looking specifically at the West Midlands, so let's tackle that as a first point. But what should we be doing in the West Midlands now to really start kickstarting these industries again? We talked a little bit about stimulus packages, we talked about VAT. It would be good to hear from each of you, and perhaps starting with you then, Margot, in terms of what do you think regionally, putting national aside for a moment, regionally, what could be done now to really kickstart this sector?
Well, I think that to start with the positives, the furlough scheme has been a real benefit. We've got over 1.4 million people in the West Midlands on furlough. And I think the priority in the short term is to make sure that as few of them fall to redundancy as possible, to get them back into the workplace so that they can support demand. Because to a large extent, although I represent manufacturers, the wider economy does need consumer demand to return. And if you've got people back into work rather than staying on furlough or becoming redundant, that's absolutely critical for the whole wider economy. In respect of manufacturing, I think what's vital is to have a support program for the skills and the people to remain in employment, but also to support the R&D future. Because in every recession, R&D suffers, private investment suffers. We've talked about the impact of cash flow on companies' cash flow. Clearly, and all the surveys point to the same conclusion, that currently and in the near future, private investment is plummeting. And therefore, we do need to look to the government to replace that lost investment into the West Midlands. And the Combined Authority under the Mayor have put a bid in for £3.2 billion of support. Now, that's not all for manufacturing, but a large part of it's for innovation in supply chains, support for SMEs, and support for existing large manufacturers as well. So that is the kind of umbrella ask under the West Midlands. And then each sector has its own ask of government. And I mentioned what the automotive industry's ask was, a little bit earlier during our webinar.
Yeah, that's super. Thank you, Margot. Arun, just picking up on Margot's point, particularly about the R&D investment side. Obviously, your role within Mobility Solutions, I'm sure you're very close to the kind of R&D side of things as well within your organisation. in terms of support regionally, what might help to kind of keep stimulating that investment within R&D from your point of view?
I think we can work on R&D only on the back of an industry that's sustainable. And for me, R&D opportunities are immense. And I think we can speak at length on either electrification or even connected vehicles, as Mike alluded to earlier. There's a lot of investment that's yet to come that way, and there's a lot of innovation that still needs to happen. We haven't spoken yet about autonomous vehicles and shared mobility and all of those aspects. So all of them require immense investments, but it's only possible provided we have a healthy industry to begin with. And I think shoring up the resources now, stimulating that demand, getting cash flow through the system, getting people once again interested in buying cars. We have a unique opportunity now through the situation that we could potentially, if we play this well from a government perspective, utilize a new fleet of vehicles replacing older ones as a massive way of not just improving air quality, but also vehicular safety. I think safety is a major aspect in our vehicles. We could clean up the old fleet, but it's got to be done in a very coordinated and clever manner, no doubt. But those are the sort of opportunities which will stimulate demand, and R&D will come. I think R&D follows opportunities. I mean, it wasn't long ago, 2016, when WMG convened a group of German press who came to the UK, and we all showed off the capabilities of the Midlands. And it was the envy of the press, of the German media. I remember talking to a few of them, and it's gone backwards since, and we've got to revive that. We're capable. You just have to revive it, find the right recipe for the Midlands.
Yeah.
Could I just interject there, Helen, and just say, I've heard about that event. It was before my time, but Arun mentioned it. And I think what's happened as a result is that the German press have gone back, reported on all the great work we've been doing in the West Midlands. And the response has been that the German government have supported their sector so much better, really, than ours has, unfortunately. And we have to get that message across to government that we need some support to cover the difference between the cost of running the existing businesses and the investment we need in the electrification of vehicles for the future. I mean, Germany are investing massively in the charging structures around their country, in gigafactories. This is what we need here in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely.
Preferably in the West Midlands.
Definitely in the West Midlands.
Yeah. And Mike, just picking perhaps on Arun's point around stimulating growth in the right way, just thinking about things like stimulating the purchasing of newer, cleaner vehicles, etc. I mean, surely that's going to be quite core and important from your perspective in kind of cleaning up the fleets from a transport perspective in the West Midlands. That's an opportunity, I presume.
Absolutely, and completely kind of agreeing with the points that Arun and Margot have said. I think there's a need to develop a much stronger and well accepted in government place-based narrative around this. There's still a tendency to operate within departmental silos between the way the funding pots are structured, the way the support's structured. And part of what we're doing as part of the combined authority and under this devolution agenda, which has potential to stall if we're not careful, but is to really, really bring together a much cleaner, more powerful place-based narrative. And I think we need to put more effort into pump priming those spaces that can have those short to medium term kind of exploitation opportunities. So in terms of solving some of my day job problems around air quality, climate change, decarbonisation of the transport system, there's a clear segue to supporting freight and logistics transport in a way that can really underpin support to advanced manufacturing and engineering, construction investment. So there's some very practical things we can actually do there that focus on the business to business opportunities, don't necessarily require the consumer acceptance and adoption that some of the more longer term technologies, such as high levels of autonomy, require that can deliver immediate benefits to the companies in the shorter term. And I think, that R&D support is critical. Completely agree with Margot. I think we need to persuade Treasury to be more realistic about intervention rates. And perhaps one of the advantages kind of in moving into next year is the ability to be less constrained by the intervention rates which Treasury would normally apply. That I think many companies want to do that innovation, because of that cash flow issue, simply can't afford the traditional mixes of match a pound for a pound. And I think we could really focus there, and targeting the client side support. So instead of trying to persuade the freight and logistics industry, which has got its own troubles, to be really innovative, provide the support straight into the AME sector to drive demand electrification, to demand IoT solutions, to demand connectivity solutions of their own freight and logistics supply chain. And in that way, we can crack two birds with one stone there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Mike. We're just going to ask our next polling question, because it is relevant on this area around sort of support packages, industrial support packages, particularly in terms of, what the government has set out so far. So this is a question, I guess, back to our audience now, in terms of what you think is going to do the best to accelerate where we're at now for industry. So we've got, do we need to develop a real heavy focus around a skills strategy, or is a focus more on investment around new innovation, for example, things like hydrogen and clean mobility? Or do we need to support better transport infrastructure and network? Or do we feel like we've kind of got everything right? And I appreciate that there are probably lots more other things that we've already talked about in this session that might be there, but keen to get the audience's view in terms of what you think might be the most important or out of those areas. So we'll just give it a few more moments to allow everyone to finish voting. And then we will stop and see what the results are. So interestingly enough, it does seem that the focus around investment in new innovation, so very much what you as the panelists have been speaking about just now, it feels like that is perhaps the single most important thing that we could be doing in terms of supporting that industrial support package. And equally, just slightly behind that is the skills strategy, which we've not touched on a huge amount yet, but is clearly quite important, and I'm sure to each of you. Does that surprise you at all? I mean, Margot, I guess from your perspective, skills and developing those skills in the manufacturing and the R&D and the innovation sector, that's going to be quite key, isn't it? I guess really to kind of get behind reigniting this for the longer term for the West Midlands.
Yes, I mean, I think that I agree with the poll result, if you like. I think that investment in innovation is the most critical thing. But I also agree that investing in skills is absolutely vital as well. Partly because, in terms of wider society, the predictions of, substantially more unemployment by the beginning of next year, I think we have to accept that COVID has accelerated many developments that were already kind of jogging along, and it's really accelerated. For example, the crisis in retail. The point I'm making is, or want to make, is that a lot of people who lose their jobs will have to be helped to develop new skills, digital skills, skills in technology, in order to be able to access the employment that should be provided as we invest more in innovation. So I think what we want, to see is a virtuous circle being created out of this crisis, rather than a vicious circle. That virtuous circle being that people who lose their jobs in sectors which won't recover should be helped to access the employment that will be there provided we get the innovation right.
Absolutely. Thank you, Margot. Arun, Bosch have always been very good at supporting the area around skills and apprenticeships and things like that. You've got quite a lot of experience as an organisation in really stimulating and driving that forward. At this critical point, what would you say in terms of needs to happen to support that ongoing skills base and ensure you're getting the right skills that you need as an organisation to keep going for the longer term?
I think skills are the perhaps most important element of innovation as well. It's not as if the technology can be planted into the industry without the skills being there. And for me, the two go hand in hand. It's important to have a vision of what a reskilling plan is. I mean, perhaps a reskilling apprenticeship. Why not? We've got traditional apprenticeship schemes running, and some of these are extremely underfunded. There's a good chance if we don't take care of the burden there is to deliver complex technologies into apprenticeships going forward, we might end up having to close some of these things because the schemes are grossly underfunded. There's a good 20 to 25% deficit in managing some of these training schemes. And this has to be somehow addressed in an immediate fashion, because we want to take people along the journey. It's not as if we're trying to discard an entire set of associates who work for us, and we want to take them on the journey, obviously skill them in the new skills that are necessary for the industry. But may I go back to the point about innovation? I think Mike mentioned we've been looking at it from a passenger car world, and there's a lot of innovation that still needs to happen in the transport and commercial vehicle segment. Electrification is clearly a solution for the short range driving that most of us do in the Midlands. But if you look at long range goods transport, commercial vehicles, even buses for that matter, there are other technologies that we should also bring into the pool. E-fuels are a significant contributor to that kind of technology, hydrogen fuel cells. So these are sort of innovation areas which will bring in the necessary investments, provided they are still valid. We've got another decade before we could all drive electrically around the world. There are a lot of internal combustion engines still on the market. Can we use innovation to come around this challenge and still address the CO2 challenge we all face? And I think those are areas which will bring in new skills as well.
Yeah. And I guess a question to all of the panel, really, do you see, and I guess this is a loaded question, but for the West Midlands, surely that focus around those societal changes that are now happening and the stimulus to move towards not just electrification, but hydrogen, like you mentioned, Arun, like e-fuels, these low carbon technologies, surely somewhere like the West Midlands could be a future hub, not just nationally, but potentially globally. And if so, what needs to be done to get there to that point? And I know that's a big question, but it would be good to hear from each of the panelists as to how might we make an area like the West Midlands that potential national or global hub for future low carbon mobility, because we've got the industry there, we've got potentially the skills. Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we're well on the journey, I think is important. So we're not starting from a particularly low base here. There are some gaps in the West Midlands building that need filling. And I would actually say one of the big ones is a proper joined up and sensible approach to devolution of energy planning. So the way the UK currently plans for and designs the local energy grids, not so much the national grid side of things, is, I think, quite flawed and in no way welded to this innovation agenda. There needs to be a lot more, which we are trying to deal with in the West Midlands, and we have an initiative sort of hosted by something called Energy Capital, which is really bringing this together. And I think there's a lot of things that actually just simply aligning things that will happen anyway around that energy planning and linking that then to the targeted support against, for me, freight and logistics is absolutely central here. They freight logistics movements account and van movements account for about 38% of all of our transport emissions, but only account for 18% of the kilometrage. So they're disproportionately challenging us in the decarbonisation agenda. There's a very clear rationale for driving support into there. We have clean air zones arriving in the patch. So done without that industry support, we will raise the bar of the challenge, which is the last thing we need. So we really need a joined up, cohesive approach around the energy supply, the vehicles that consume it, whether that's hydrogen or battery, really doesn't matter. And then linking that into exportable solutions, which we can generate through the R&D sector.
Thanks, Mike. Margot, what's your view? I mean, does the West Midlands in some way need to come together and perhaps create a package or a plan or a vision in order to perhaps go to government or go to industry and say, look, this is what we can do as a region and this is what we believe the future looks like for us?
Well, I think the good news actually on this, as I think Mike has already alluded to this, is that as a region, I think we have already come together. We realise that we have huge assets in the area of mobility, innovation, and the future connectedness of our transport systems. And we've got a lot of different pilots going on across the region where we're joining up policy on transport. And I think that is getting government attention. And I mean, we hosted an event with the Mobility Minister, who is actually herself a West Midlands MP, Rachel McLean, a few weeks ago. And they are now trialling all sorts of micro mobility solutions. We have the very light rail expertise that resides not just at WMG, but also at the Centre of Excellence in Dudley. So I think that we are far and away leaders, I think, within the UK on future mobility solutions. And we should try to keep a sort of technology neutral approach in this. We need to support all the new and novel carbon reducing technologies. Some are going to be more suitable for some forms of transport and some for others. In terms of the electrification agenda, I think it's really vital that we get a gigafactory approved for the West Midlands. And that, I think, will really, as long as the government support the necessary infrastructure improvements, the charging structure around the country, then we have to be able to manufacture batteries at scale for that particular technology to really pay off in terms of reduced emissions and future employment.
Thanks, Margot. Arun, just from your perspective, and we touched on it earlier about sort of Germany and perhaps other parts of Europe kind of almost being a little bit more advanced, a little bit more forward thinking from perhaps, from that visit you mentioned a few years ago. Now, I know Bosch is a global company, but has sort of German heart still. Are there some lessons learnt, or from your perspective as a business, that we could perhaps take and adopt and apply to the West Midlands to perhaps stimulate that sort of future hub, if you like, for low carbon mobility?
I think I might just repeat what Mike and Margot mentioned. So for fear of doing that, let me start differently. I think we've got the mechanisms. We've got the Automotive Council. We've got the Automotive Council Technology Group, the Supply Chain Group. We've got within the scope of the Technology Council, the APC located here in the Midlands, the Advanced Propulsion Centre. So we've got the building blocks to make these things happen. In fact, the success of the Automotive Council, which is almost 10 years now, and almost to the month, I should say, and that's got a massive convening power. And we've got to use those things much more forcefully, much more collaboratively to drive the national agenda. We cannot come up with something brand new. We don't need to. We've got the ability. We've got people in business talking to one another. We just have to do it. We just have to do it. I think commit ourselves to doing it politically. Of course, the economic backup is necessary. Without the economic underpinning, none of this strategy will come into fruition. Industry on its own cannot, and the government cannot on its own. So we need a collaborative approach. But the stimulus must come from the government.
Yeah. And of course, the Automotive Council was almost, if I remember rightly, set up in the backdrop of the kind of 2008 economic crisis, where the automotive industry desperately needed a stimulus package to get the industry back going again. And since then, it's developed this life of its own, where it's sort of set the narrative and the strategy for the industry moving forward. So I guess what you're saying, Arun, is that we need to better utilize that and bring that on board in order to kind of set this new plan for a kind of post-COVID recovery in motion, really.
That's right. I mean, let's for a minute assume, Margot mentioned about the initiative they had a couple of weeks ago, bringing industry together. Let's assume that's part of a wider framework of the future of mobility for the Midlands. Potentially also a national plan. Why don't we take this to another level, get the commitment behind it, and begin to draw up solutions for the future? Because just going back to the industry we had pre-COVID is not sustainable. It's not the future. We shouldn't trick ourselves, because the world has moved on. And we have to make the switch. It will be painful. It will require sacrifices and new directions, but this is the time to do it, I think.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that, Arun. I sort of when I wrote some notes, you almost read out the notes I'd written for myself there. And
there you go. That's technology for you.
Sort of links to the skills gap thing, and there's a lack of critical thinking, and I think systems dynamics thinking in the skills gap. It's not just about the digitization thing, and I think that will help both the engineers focus on outcome-based solutions as opposed to solutions looking for problems to solve, and also help the policymakers really focus on things that actually will affect a real change as opposed to initiative-itis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Margot, I know you previously in a former life you were a member of Parliament and also a minister, and you've had experience of that side of life, I guess. From that perspective, what do you think organisations, businesses, OEMs, sort of that idea of kind of putting together this package and utilising the Automotive Council, what do you think that government and those people in positions of power and sort of generating future policy need from us and need to hear from us, and how do we perhaps accelerate that support back into government from your point of view?
Well, I think that we need to, as Arun was saying a minute ago, we have an awful lot of assets ready to be utilised, and we don't want to waste time duplicating what's already there. We have some great universities in the West Midlands. We have the Mayor, who's very active. We have fantastic innovative companies like Bosch. We have the assets of future mobility and innovation and all of this. And we need to get across to government, I think, the message that if they invest in the West Midlands, even to the same extent as they currently invest in London, Oxford and Cambridge, they will get a very good return because we have the assets. We're just in a cash flow crisis. And our assets are capable of being transformed into new innovation very quickly, which will lead to the jobs of the future. So I think it's important to get the message across to government that what we're not looking for is subsidy of old jobs, subsidy towards, the way we used to do things. This is more of an investment in the future. So I think we need to get that message across and to aim that at different levels of government. We need to be working with local government and regional government in order to influence ministers in the business transport departments and the Treasury, particularly the Treasury. And I think we need to, when we come to influencing the Prime Minister and his team, I think it's important that they see the social good of what we're proposing in terms of how it fits so well with their desire to level up the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's important to stress the social implications of the innovation and support that we're able to deliver if we get the help and support that we need.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. So we've got one final poll actually that we're going to just launch, and I think it's very much in that space of, you know, national government and what do we need to do in order to help businesses perhaps adopt a more kind of sustainable and green recovery. So we're looking at that future of mobility now and what it is that we might need to do and what we need to ask government to do to help move us in that direction. So we're just going to give a few moments to allow people to respond to this question as well, and see what people think. So let's take a quick look. And here we are. So it's about creating a market stimulus. 80% of you in the audience think that that's absolutely key. And I think that going back to where we started in this debate and discussion about how we stimulate the market now, I think it's very key that in order to get that green movement going into that low carbon hub that we've talked about, we need to find mechanisms in which to stimulate the market, because if we don't stimulate that, it's very hard to move forward as it is. Closely followed, and around 50% of you think that also we need to cut VAT, particularly on greener products. There's been a lot of debate recently. We've seen that the hospitality industry, for example, have had VAT completely cut. I think there was hope, particularly in the auto sector, that they might scrap VAT for the time being to help stimulate market demand. That has not yet materialised, but clearly the audience also feel that that's another important aspect. Just give a few opportunities for the panel just to quickly comment on that. Arun, does that sort of tally up with your thinking as well, or would you pick a different one?
No, I think it does, to be honest, because we all produce for markets. And if the market is not stimulated, there's little that technology can do on its own. So I think we need that kind of a stimulus. We need something that revives the industry in the short term, but more importantly, revives it enough for it to come back and invest and go, as Margot said, pay back to the society.
Yeah,
I mean, that has to happen. Otherwise, it's going to be a long discussed topic, but seldom acted upon. And that stimulus is important. And now, please.
Yeah. And Margot, the VAT cut, do you think that that's a possibility still? Do you think that we should continue to look to see if we can push, particularly on those greener products and low carbon mobility products?
Well, I think it's a bit of a tricky one because, well, I certainly, in answer to your question, I do think that a VAT cut is a possibility. I don't think a total lifting of VAT, I don't think that's on the cards, but I think that, you know, the government has reduced VAT for the hospitality sector, and I think that it's quite feasible to argue for that VAT reduction to extend to the automotive sector. Having said that, I think that the government needs to do different things to stimulate the market for low carbon transport, more around the kind of infrastructure like the charging infrastructure around the country. That needs a rocket booster put under it. And some direct subsidies. They've just announced, in fact, a subsidy, or the principle of subsidy for electric bikes, for example. That's very recent, this week. So those things are important to stimulate the market for low carbon modes of transport. But the investment we need in order to get to the electric models being produced does also have to come from the sale of existing cars, existing products. And although you know, you can see a real takeoff in terms of demand for electric vehicles, it is at the moment from a very low base. The industry needs to sell the cars that it's currently producing. So the VAT cut, I would argue for, doesn't directly benefit greener transport, but it enables the companies to sell the products which will finance the development of those greener methods of transport in the future.
Thanks, Margot. So we're almost about 10 minutes away from closing. So I want to just give some opportunity to the audience now to ask a few questions. We've had a couple come in already. So the first one is from Tom Johnson, and he says, it'd be good to get your thoughts as a panel on the part of the industry in this region that can play in Build Back Better agenda, particularly the drive to net zero and what is required from government, central and local, to support this, the Build Back Better agenda. Would anyone like to take that one on board? I must confess, I don't know a huge amount about the Build Back agenda, but maybe Tom Johnson might be able to enlighten us a little bit more.
Mike has just put a very good answer on the chat box.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Mike.
So yeah, as much in reference to Tom's second question on there, I think. So there's a huge amount that is already committed, and I think our challenge going forward is to consolidate that and use everything that we can throw at it in terms of the tricks that are up the sleeve of the automotive sector, which I don't really see at the moment being pushed out of the kind of passenger car solutions, which I think can be deployed a lot more widely. And I think then we really need to double down on the investment in the infrastructure. A lot of it has been about addressing that legacy of underinvestment that we've seen in the Midlands and in the North. And that's awesome. It's going to be a little bit painful as we redress that underinvestment, because you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs in this scenario. But equally, that doesn't actually, we can't sit back and say job done. Actually, there's now moving forward, and actually we've got to land a growth in this region, even without the economic shocks or with the economic shocks, that's equivalent to a city the size of Bristol over the top of the existing urban environment. And that is going to drive some real innovation in business models and consumer adoption, and is going to need backing by some really joined up investment across the connectivity, digitization and transport and energy sectors.
Thank you, Mike. And this is specifically within the HS2 remit that I think that Tom was talking about here. Just so for purposes of everyone else, there was Tom was saying, given our central location as a first stop on HS2 line out of London, with Birmingham International Airport, an extended metro and smart bus system, it's clear that our transport network will be key to the region's future success. What do we think needs to happen in terms of support from central and local government to support this? I guess, Mike, I know you've answered that to a point. Margot, Arun, do you have any other views in terms of that specifically for Birmingham?
Margot, do you want to go first?
Okay. I think one thing we haven't talked about, Helen, is in foreign investment.
Yes.
And I think that although we have major asks of our government at the moment, the West Midlands traditionally has been well, I say traditionally, certainly over the last couple of years, it has secured more foreign investment than anywhere else in the UK outside of London and the Southeast. And so we want to continue that positive relationship with the rest of the world, particularly with, and I think we need to give particular attention to this, given that we also have Brexit coming down the tracks, so that we need to, I think, work again collectively across industry, certainly sector by sector within the West Midlands, to look at continuing to attract that foreign investment. I mean, I can give you a couple of examples just live at WMG at the moment. This week we welcomed Lotus Cars, now owned by a Chinese company, to WMG, and we'll be doing all the research and development with them, creating many new jobs on our Wellesbourne campus. And these jobs will be to develop the R&D necessary to electrify the Lotus fleet. And likewise with an Indian company, TVS, who are a century-old bike company. We're looking there. They've just bought Norton motorcycles. We're looking to deploy our R&D expertise to work with them to raise the standards of the Norton motorbikes. And so there's a lot going on. We need to encourage more of that across the region, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the report, it was by DIT, I think, about this level of inward investment. And as you say, West Midlands was the highest outside of London in the southeast. And when I saw it, I think the thing that sprung to mind was, why was that? What was it that you think the West Midlands has done so well to attract that inward investment that even perhaps other regions could take and learn from your point of view?
Well, I'm sure we've all got a view on that. I think the Midlands is known for high quality, advanced engineering and manufacturing. And when companies are looking to expand into the UK, if they're in that area or technology, I think they want to be in an area where the skills are there. And because of the innovation, it's a virtuous circle. We have got the skills. We've got a skilled labour market. We've got fantastic universities, and we have Birmingham Airport. We also have a really forward-looking mayor in Andy Street, who's led various trade delegations around the world to encourage people to come in. The West Midlands has been very much open for business, and I think it's all of those things really, and more besides.
Thanks, Margot. Arun, from Bosch's point of view, how does Bosch see the West Midlands and particularly that point about inward investment into that region?
I think the inward investment will come when they chase opportunities. And 2008 revival is what brought us to a position of strength, and we must make this a national asset besides being a regional asset, because this is a formula on which the national government can base its revival of the job sector on. I mean, Tata's bought Jaguar Land Rover. That's been a significant impetus to the region, and that's attracted us as a supply chain. Here, we've got some very highly skilled engineering jobs in the region, serving JLR and other suppliers in the region as well. So, and other customers for that matter. We've got Bosch Engineering in Nuneaton, servicing a wide range of OEMs. So we've got the investment, but that only comes on the back of a government commitment to build on these assets. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, thanks, Arun. So final question then, we've just had in, which is, what would be the Midlands' role in COP26? We talked a little bit earlier about that, future investment in future of mobility, low carbon mobility, but just perhaps taking that one step further with COP26 now happening next year, what sort of role will the West Midlands take in that at all? Probably Mike, do you want to answer that one? And then I'm going to wrap up.
Oh, you come to me for the last one.
No pressure.
So, I mean, I try and keep it high level, I suppose, to at the risk of being flippant. I think we just got to be really brave and force those collaborations, get our sectors to look outside of their sectors more. I think as Arun and others have intimated, things are not going back to normal, and we need to kind of pivot around those key disruptions, focus on the collaboration, the data sharing, the authority and public sector perspective, make sure we're in the middle of facilitating people to do what they need to do and organisations to do what they need to do, and keep focusing on enablement, and keep that government to account and the single narrative back around what this place offers collectively.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of this, the opportunities are there. Business needs to make this happen, and we will.
Yeah. Business needs to make this happen, and we will. Keeping government to account. I think future investment only comes with stimulating the market. I think there's been some great debate here today. I want to just thank the panelists. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Arun. It has been fascinating to have this chance to talk to you. I hope the audience as well. Thank you for taking part in our polling as well. Great to get your insight. We're going to share all of this online, so you guys will be able to watch it again should you wish. We're also going to share some of the polling results. Please look out for our posts on LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel. Do subscribe so you don't miss out to any of our future events as well. But thank you so much, everyone, today. I've learned a lot and it's been thoroughly interesting. So thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Very much for facilitating it, Helen.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Arun, for putting Bosch's strength behind this series. It's excellent.
Not at all. I think we need a collaborative approach, and thanks to you and Mike for joining us. That's been really fascinating.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.